let me go back to finish. So, Flush, a Biography by Virginia Woolf, is a 1933 short story. It's not too long. Probably get through it in a couple hours, I think. And it is, while it's a breezy kind of read, it is uniquely told with a pretty sprawling kind of life narrative about a dog. And at first I was kind of skeptical because I came into it not really knowing much about it, but then upon realizing that it was about a dog, I thought it was going to be a little bit kind of, I don't know, like, knowing Virginia Woolf, obviously, I love her work, I love Mrs. Dalloway, Orlando is probably one of my favorites, and obviously To the Lighthouse, definitely classics of modernist, especially literature, and yeah, so this, I thought it was going to be a little bit forced a narrative, like just like a dog, through the life of a dog through, I thought it was going to be a little bit bland, but it actually turned out to be a lot richer and more introspective than I thought. It would have been, basically Flush is partially rooted in reality, kind of in a way that The Loser by Thomas Bernhard talks about, two fictional, a friendship sorry, stuttering more, a friendship between the great Glenn Gould, very virtuosic, and his, two buddies, or, two friends during school, and they, they both have, like interesting kind of dynamics, and that's kind of similar to this. It's because it's about Elizabeth Barrett and her husband, Robert Browning, and classical with Woolf is that we find her very, not staunchly kind of like in your face, but a definite feminist undertones going on here, overtones at times that were pleasantly welcomed, I thought, because she talks about how often throughout history, and then she goes into this more detail in a room with one's own. I keep wanting to say a room with a view, E.M. Forster, but yes, in a room, of one's own, she talks about, feminism, that women need a place, they need kind of the wherewithal and the resources, which is mostly takes the shape for, especially women artists or poets or, writers especially, need a room of their own, I have a room of my own that I love too, and yeah, I'm lucky enough to be able to have the time, and although, it's not always perfect, and sometimes I'm scrambling for money to do the things that I love, but women never really had that opportunity. I think the reason why there were so few is that not only were they not written about, but especially in the case of Elizabeth Barrett, who wrote and actually the name Flush actually comes from the real life Cocker Spaniel, owned by the real life Elizabeth Barrett. So her husband Robert Browning kind of got the lion's share of all the fame. And I don't know much about more than a surface level kind of analysis, but I do know that he got kind of more of the spotlight than she did, because not for any reason because he was more or less, generally more talented, and it just happens to be that, men tend to be talented, but because women were less advocated for, less made less accessible to readers around the, like they weren't, their stuff was less published, they had a harder time doing these things, and part of the reason that, of which Virginia Woolf highlights here is that, they just didn't have the ability, they were through child rearing and through different things, and the poetry, like she goes through like a pretty big history in A Room of One's Own, but there's we're focusing more on Flush though, and seeing through his eyes what is going on, and this is really interesting because Flush is, right off the bat we get a view of a Cocker Spaniel with a is told through this kind of omniscient narrator who's kind of going into Flush's head and mind space and like what things were like for Flush, and that the world that he saw was very simple, like dogs are very sense bound, she talks about also the kind of strength that certain Cocker Spaniels have because they're from Spain, and that they were bred to be kind of a there are some versions of the dog, I think maybe a different breed altogether, but I think with Cocker Spaniels they're more commodious, or not commodious, but they're more accommodating. I think they're more of a lap dog, I guess, and they're more kind of cozy and lovey. They're not like the kind of they're not the kind of guard dogs, like who are very on edge and very secured and very robust, I guess, with a belt. They're more like kind of I guess it's been a while since I've interacted with Cocker Spaniels, but I do know that they're more kind of a lighter breed, I believe. So this is the kind of idea we get, or this is the kind of background origin story we get for Flush, and how he ends up in the hands of the Barretts, or the Browning, in their family, and in their home. And this is actually, I forgot to say this, is actually set in 1840s, I believe. 1830s to 1840s, because there's, I think, 3 different acts. It's kind of a 3-act structure going on, and with Flush in the first time of that, he's basically kind of brought into the family, and as a background, and then the second part I think is like the early 1840s, and it's basically them in London. They go back and forth between Italy and London, so there's a great affinity for Italian culture, and also Flush's kind of different kind of romances with different dogs and cultures as well. And because dogs are primarily, because they're colorblind, to my knowledge, and that they are very, very smell driven, driven. They are through the fact they are the olfactory. That's the term I'm looking at. They're very smell driven. So they get more to they're able to not only smell, just with we're very. And Virginia Woolf puts this very astutely, very aptly. So in the book, she talks about how poets, something to the effect that poets are always horrible at, they're kind of, even our best poets are like Shakespeare and Milton, and can't remember who else she mentions, but they're almost they're quite even the best of them are unable to like describe any other smell than a rose and maybe a rose, and maybe that's it, like lavender and other things they're able to, but for the most part they're limited. But dogs have this whole array of just scents, and so everything's anybody who has a dog, and I don't have a dog, I used to have a dog, but and what I remember of him was that he was very, very, like I said, like sniffing everything up every single second, just everything, having to sniff everything. Every time you go outside, it's like a new, and you can come back inside, if you come back from work, it's like a new smell, it's a new layer of smell for them to absorb and to acclimate themselves. And they are very curious, very curious, creatures, so dogs are obviously sniffing out predators too is a big thing too. So even for the like the flush, like the kind of harmless flush, is able to kind of provide that kind of security for them. So but yeah, so with Flush, he ends up going to, I think, to Italy at some point. But there's also a time where he's looking through. There's a kind of modernist lens of seeing the world through the class kind of differences, and this is kind of reminding me a little bit of D.H. Lawrence and his kind of take on the stark class divisions in early 1900s, in around his contemporary time. Through his books like Lady Chatterley's Lover, or but Virginia Woolf also does this, but more so back, I think, about 80 years before him. So in the 1840s and 50s, talking about how like on the Wimble Street, how every single smell of like the rancid poor and the abject kind of poverty circulating around there. Comprising and just like making, and how Flush saw or sensed all those things through his scent. Like, and Virginia Woolf does a fantastic job, like just like immersing herself in what a dog might be, like what a dog might sense, like not doing less with language, but using language very gorgeously and in a way to kind of capture what a dog might think, and it kind of reminded me of like what it's like to be a bat too. Or also too, like perfume too. And another thing I didn't even know going into this that there would be so many, maybe not as many similarities as far in anything aside from like the subject of smell. But it is a very kind of interesting thing with Gwenwy in Perfume, and how obviously the villain has sees the world with a very pronounced sense. He's able to smell and sniff things out a lot better than 99% of people, which makes him kind of a masterful kind of perfumer. And then the kind of remind me of how Flush saw the world. So yeah, that just some kind of intertextual kind of relationships and similarities. But yeah, so but this is a lot lighter and more upbeat. Like I said, it's a light read, and I definitely recommend it. Something that probably too that you could probably read to your kids as well. It's not I'd even go as far as to say as even though some of the themes might be lost in them. There's a little bit, but there's definitely like a lot. It's pretty cozy too. I wouldn't say it's like fluff literature. It's definitely not fluff literature. It's definitely has a lot of social commentary on the time, and especially drawing back on the mid 19th century, and but yeah, that is that's about all I have for Flush by Virginia Woolf. Thank you.